friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's It's a Bird, Heart Tree, Simply Celebrate Critters add-on, all the speech bubbles, and Snow Much Fun. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm starting with my tree, and I pulled out some nice, rich, warm brown shades for that. I'm using E21, E23, E25, and E27. I'm coloring darkest to lightest, so I'm first taking that E27 and laying a little bit of shadow along the outside edges of that tree. I'm also going to add some shadow to the little heart cut out in the center of the tree and to each of the branches. And then once I have my shadows laid in, I'll start to come in with my next shade, which is going to be E25. And I'll go over the edge of that E27 and just pull that darkest color a little bit out into this mid-tone and just add a little bit of extra color in there. You can also stamp something into that little heart cutout in the center of the tree. I chose not to for this card since I already had 3 speech bubbles, but you definitely could, and there's different options in that heart tree stamp set and also in your other Lawn Fawn stamp sets. I am also going to be coloring 3 different trees. I'm going to use the same colors for all of them, so I'm just showing you the one on screen, but I will need 3 to complete the scene that I had envisioned. So after the E25, I came in with the E23 and filled in quite a bit with that. And now I am coming in with my final shade, which is the E21, and just adding a little extra highlight with that 4th shade since this tree is such a large image. I'll add that highlight to the tops of the branches and the center of the trunk. And then I am going to move on to the leaves, and I'm going to use G21, G24, and G28 for my first combination. So I'm starting with that G28 and adding a bit of shadow to some of the leaves. I want to have 2 different shades of leaves in this mix just to really make the tree stand out. So I'm kind of picking and choosing right now which ones are going to be the darker of the 2 combos, and just laying in that G28 at the base of each leaf. So the only thing that I did differently on the other 2 trees was switch up which of the leaves were the darker combination and which of the leaves were the lighter combination. Once I have that G28 laid in, I'm going to start blending out with the G24, just really going over the edge of that G28 since it is quite a bit darker and pulling that darker color into the mid-tone, and then saving a little bit of room at the tip of each of those leaves for the highlight shade, which is going to be the G21. So I'm going to fill in the rest of those. The G21 and the G24 are much closer together than the G24 and the G28, so I don't have to work very hard at all to get these 2 to blend. And then for the rest of the leaves, I'm going to remove the G28 and add in the G20. So for these, I'm starting with the G24, just laying in a little bit of shadow with that. And then I'm going to blend out with the G21 for the mid-tone. And then I'm going to bring in that highlight shade, which is the G20. And that G20 has a little bit of a yellow tone to it. So it really brightens things up and provides that contrast that I was looking for between the 2 different kinds of leaves. But because they are all in the same family and that I overlapped some of the colors, it all looks really cohesive. It doesn't look like there's 2 different kinds of leaves on the same tree. So I am going to add a little bit of that G24 into the map that the one mouse is holding, and then I'll blend out with the G21. I want to create like a little bit of a land mass in there, so I'm going to be adding in some different shades. But I'll move on to my mice, and for them I'm going to go with my favorite combo for mice, which is W00, E70, and E71. And I'm going to color all three at the same time since they're pretty small and they're really close together. That way I don't have to keep switching back and forth between markers. So I'm starting with my darkest shade, which is the E71, and laying in some shadow up under their little hats, on the sides of their arms, the edges of their ears, and their hindquarters. And then I'm going to start blending out with the E70 and just softening that up and taking that out a little bit further. And once I have all that laid in, I will switch to the W00 and really soften the area on their muzzles and add in some nice highlights on the areas where I think that they should go. I'll also add a little bit of shading with that for their bellies. And by the way, if you're looking for other ways to color mice, I do have a video on 8 different ways to color the Lawn Fawn mice. They are so much fun to color and there's so many different options. So if you're looking for something a little bit unique to try out, definitely check out that video. Then I'm going to move on to kind of like a golden yellow khaki tone using E81, E84, and E87. And I will do this for all of their little explorer hats. I think this color combo worked out really well for this. I hardly ever reach for these shades, but I thought that they were perfect for this kind of card and for these little outfits. So I added in the E87 first, blended out with the E84, and then used the E81 for the highlight. And at first I wasn't sure if I was going to color in their vest to match or make them look a little bit different, but I ended up liking the combo enough that I decided to do the vest to match. So I'll go ahead and do both of those as well for the 2 mice that are wearing them. And again, I'm just putting the darkest at the back of their bodies and blending forward with the highlight on the front of their bodies, which is just how I prefer to color. So I'm going to fill all of that in, and then I'll also add a little bit of that E81 into the map to give it a little bit of that brown tone. Then I'll switch to my bear, and I decided to do a black bear for today's card because he's actually going to be hiding behind the tree, and I didn't want him to get lost in the scene by going with a brown since the tree is brown already. And I really love black bears anyway, so I reached for the toner grays. I went with T3, T5, and T7. Laid in my shadows with that T7, and because he's facing completely forward, I did my shadows equally on both the left and the right. Then I used the T5 as my midtone, and now I'm coming in with that T3 for my highlight and just filling everything in, and I really like how he turned out. While I have these shades out, I'm also going to add a bit of color to one of my birds, the one that has the little cap on his head. So I used the T7 for that, and then also added a bit to the tips of his wings and his tail, and then blended out with the T5, and then the T3, and then I used the T3 to fill in all of their beaks. And then I'm going to take away the T7 and add in the T1, and I'm going to do the binoculars. So I'm using the T5 for the darkest for those, blending out with the T3, and then I'll use a little bit of T1 for a highlight at the top. I'm also going to add a little bit of the T1 to the belly of the bird that I just colored, and then I'll add that T1 to kind of outline each of those speech bubbles and just make those edges stand out a bit. And I chose the sentiments that are in there from the various stamp sets that I showed at the beginning, but there are lots of different options that you could use. I did also bring in the T0 just to soften up that T1 on those speech bubbles. And then I'm going to switch to some blue tones. I'm going to use B000, B00, and B01. I'm going to color all of my birds in with the same combo. So I'm starting with that B01 and just adding in my darkest with that. For the one that had the black tips on the wings and the tail, I just kind of went over the edges of that to help integrate the two shades together. And then for the rest of the birds, I just started with that and then used the B00 for the mid-tone, and then I'll use the B000 for the highlight. Then I'm going to take that B000 and just add a touch of color to the glass parts of the binoculars. And then I'll use the B01 to add some blue to finish off the map. For the bear's muzzle, I'm going to use E53 and E55. And now I need to give everybody some rosy cheeks. So I'm going to pull in R01, R20, and R22. So I'm starting with the R22. I'll also color in the noses of my mice and the insides of their ears. I'll give my birds some rosy cheeks as well. And then I'm going to blend out around the edges with the R20. And I actually ended up not even needing the R01. Everything blended out how I liked it, so I just left it. But I did go back and add a little bit extra of that R22 to the bear. Then I grabbed a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and got that going off to the side. And I'm going to go over the eyes of my critters that have their eyes open just to make them nice and black and shiny again. So that's just 2 of the mice and 1 of the birds. Then I'll bring in the second sheet of trees and trim all of these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock that I've trimmed down with the largest of the small stitch rounded rectangle stackables. And I'm going to ink blend a background onto this using the Cloudy stencil and some tumbled glass Distress Oxide ink. I wanted to go with something that was a little bit more blue toned to match the blues that I used for my birds, but I wanted it to be a bit more subtle, so that's why I went with the tumbled glass. And I am going to just change up the formation of those clouds by flipping over my stencil and turning that to one of the other sides, choosing a different cloud formation, and then continuing to blend down that panel. I am having to go back over that quite a bit because this is such a pale ink, but it's worth it once you build up that color. I think it's really soft and subtle, and I think it just works really nicely with the coloring that I chose to do for this particular scene. So I'm going to do 4 different cloud formations, and I don't need to go any further than that because we're going to have some grass down at the bottom, but I just want to make sure that the full sky is filled up. I'll even go ahead and add a little bit of extra ink down at the bottom just in case anything there would show. And then I'm going to press some of this ink onto an acrylic block. And I think this ink pad is getting a bit dry because it wasn't really transferring much ink over there, but I just pressed until I had enough, added a little spritz of water to that. I'm going to mix that up with a thin paintbrush to make it more fluid, and then I'm going to tap that all over the background just to give it a bit more movement and interest. And then once I'm happy with how that's looking, I will set this panel aside to dry. And then I trimmed down another panel of the Bristol using the same die, but I trimmed off the top with the grass portion of the mushroom border. And I am going to add on some Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide ink at the top. I wanted the top to be a little bit darker and then the bottom to be a bit lighter. So I'm starting with the darker of my 2 greens. So I'm laying down quite a bit of that Mowed Lawn until I'm happy with how that's looking, and then I'll bring in my Twisted Citron, which is much brighter and a bit more yellow. It kind of ties in that G20 marker in some of the leaves. And I'll just blend back and forth between those 2 shades until I'm happy with how that panel is looking. I decided not to do any splatter detail on this one just because I'm going to be using a thinner looking sentiment on this piece and stamping that down at the bottom, so I didn't want any of the splatter to kind of distract from the words and make it illegible. So I'm stamping out I'd Be Lost Without You, and that is from the Car Critters stamp set. And I'm going to stamp that down twice in VersaFine Onyx Black ink so that it is nice and bold. And there is that stamp set that I used. Then I'm going to create an insert for the inside of my card. So I've just popped in another piece of white cardstock that I trimmed down with the same die as the focal panel. And I'm going to stamp in dough ink, and I'm using the Last Mice from the It's a Bird plus Have a Mice Day, which is from the same set, and then one of the other little birds I stamped in the opposite top corner just to add a little extra interest since he is looking up that direction. I stamped that down a few times to make sure that that was nice and bold, and then I'm going to set that aside. I've created an A2 standard size card base from some Lawn Fawn chocolate bar cardstock. So it's 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall, and I'm going to glue the insert to the inside of the card first. And then I will close that back up and bring in my focal panel, which I will also glue flat to the card front. So I'm just making sure that that is centered on there, and then I will bring in my grass panel, which I'm going to pop up with some foam tape, and I will just line that up with the bottom edges, make sure that I have that on there straight, and then press that down into place, and then I can bring in my images. So 2 of these trees I want to tuck back behind that grassy hill, which is why I placed my foam tape down a little bit so that I would have room to do that. So I'm going to glue these 2 flat to the scene, just adding some liquid glue there, making sure that I have them placed where I wanted them before I commit. And then I'm going to add liquid glue to all of the little leaf areas to make sure that they are well adhered. And then I'm going to take the 3rd tree, and that one is going to go down in front and overlap that grassy hill. So I'm adding foam tape to the top portion of the tree and peeling off those little release papers, and then I will add liquid glue to the bottom of the tree where that is going to overlap the hill that is already popped up. So I'll just position that between the 2 trees and add that. And then I've realized I forgot to add my little bear in first, so I'm just going to peel up the bottom of that tree before that glue had time to dry. I added a little piece of foam tape behind the bear's head since that's overlapping into the back panel, and I just tucked him back behind that tree, and I think he looks so cute there. I really love how this card is starting to come together. So I wanted these mice to kind of look like they're on a little bear hunt. It kind of reminds me of that nursery song that we used to sing in like preschool, going on a bear hunt, and you have to like clap your legs and do all of these things where you're going over things and through things and all of that. So I wanted them to be searching in all different directions. So normally I would have my critters kind of facing in toward the center of the card, but I wanted to do the opposite for this one just to really drive home the fact that they're kind of like searching all around. So I actually placed the critters so that they're looking out and away from the bear, where he's kind of like popping out as like a secret to the viewer. And then I'm going to start filling in with these smaller little accessory images, the birds and the speech bubbles. I added the "You're great" to the bear because I thought that that was fun since bears growl. I just thought that that was kind of a cute thing to add to him. And then I'm just figuring out the placement of the rest of the birds and the rest of these speech bubbles. And once I'm happy with how they are looking, I'll start popping up the ones that need popped up, and then just gluing the ones that are already overlapping something that is popped up with the regular liquid glue. So just going to go around and add the rest of these back into the position that they are already in. I'm going to pop up this last little bird as well. And I decided not to add any glitter or anything to this card because I feel like it turned out a bit on the masculine side. I think it could definitely be gender neutral, but since it looked a little bit more masculine with the color palette, I decided not to add any glitter. So that is going to finish this one off, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. I hope that you guys enjoyed it too. There is another peek at the inside. If you did like it, please give the video a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Also, leave me a comment if you remember the nursery song that I was talking about. I can remember having so much fun doing all of the motions along with the teacher. I can't even remember all the lyrics now, but I just remember doing all the motions and having a blast. So I hope that you guys have an absolutely amazing day. If you're interested in any of the products that I used today, they'll all be listed and linked in the description bar below. If you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. And please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post new videos. Thank you guys so much again, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.